Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 833, July the 10th, 2019. Thank you so much for tuning in. Alrighty, we have a lot of news breaking, a lot of news broke yesterday, I should say. So let's go ahead and cover this, and there's quite a few things we want to get to here, and we have limited time. So, as many of you know, you probably heard from multiple reports yesterday that Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz, the custodian, has interviewed Christopher Steele. The interview occurred on the 3rd and the 5th, both days for about 8 hours, so a total of 16 hours worth of interview time. This happened at exactly the time that President Trump was in the UK. Now, so it has now been confirmed that, just as was earlier reported, Christopher Steele refused to talk with John Durham, or anyone doing the William Barr investigation. But he did agree, after I believe he was told to by the UK government, to speak to Horowitz. Now, why would he speak to Horowitz and not speak to Durham? Well, it's very simple, because Horowitz is not a prosecutor who can bring charges against him. Horowitz is simply the Inspector General who does an internal review. And so that's why he would talk to Horowitz and not talk to Durham, because there's no criminal liability really for him to talk to Horowitz. Let's see. It appears that one of Christopher Steele's lawyers was Adam Waldman, a guy we've talked a lot about. Of course, he was involved, if you remember, he was involved in representing Christopher Steele and also Deripaska. He was trying to cut a deal with Mark Warner, and they were trying to cut a deal so that Deripaska could get back into the country. At the same time, trying to work a deal with Steele. There was a lot of things going on there that were pretty weird. Comey shot it down. So anyway, this whole cabal of characters, Mark Warner, Christopher Steele, and Mr. Waldman, of course, still together, it looks like. So yes, it looks like Adam Waldman was one of the lawyers representing Steele. And why does Steele need a lawyer? Well, if you're Christopher Steele, you definitely need a lawyer, even if you're talking to Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz's 3 investigators. Now, Horowitz himself wasn't there. He's the custodian. He wasn't there. He sent 3 investigators there. And let's see, Reuters is reporting that the investigation found Steele's information credible enough to warrant extending their investigation indefinitely. This is the custodian's people. Keep that in mind. Yes, they're people within the DOJ that work for the custodian, whose job is to clean up the mess. And of course, you can bet that they're deep state. You can bet that they're going to try to put a lid on things as much as possible and try to clean up the mess very quietly and go away without anybody noticing. That's the job of the Inspector General. He is another layer of cover-up. But when it gets so bad that they have to break out the Inspector General, he knows that everyone knows that things happened that probably shouldn't have happened. Maybe some crimes, maybe some violations. So you bring in the custodian, Horowitz, and his people so that they can do the cleanup. And so they try to clean up the mess because there's a mess. Everybody knows it there. They can see it's there. So they can't ignore the mess exists. So they come in, they clean up the mess, they do it very quickly and very quietly with as little fanfare as possible. That's the role of the Inspector General, Huckleberry Horowitz. So obviously, his 3 investigators are going to be looking for the most favorable situation they can get from Steele. They're not going to challenge him at all. And that's exactly why he was happy to talk to them, but he won't get anywhere near talking to Durham. Back to that in just a moment. They say here that Steele offered new and important information. Yeah, right. I'm pretty sure that any information Christopher Steele has can't be that important. Every damn thing that he supposedly put in the alleged Steele dossier turned out to be bullshit. This guy has no credibility. And we know his number one goal in life during 2016 was to keep Trump from being elected. To interfere, to meddle in the American elections. No one individual in all of 2016, no one individual interfered or tried to interfere or meddle more in the American elections than Christopher Steele. Keep that in mind. Now keep also in mind that Steele was perfectly happy to meet 2 times with Uncle Bob the Executioner's investigators, and they met for 2 days back in September of 2017. Now, Durham will certainly have access to the full unredacted interview with Christopher Steele, and I'm sure he'll figure out pretty quickly that the folks working for Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz, the custodian, were not there to get any real truth. Okay? He'll figure that out pretty quick, and he also knows why Steele doesn't want to talk to him. But Mr. Durham has a couple options here, and I can't tell you what Durham's going to do. I can only tell you what I would do if I were Durham. I would continue on my investigation, but from this point forward, I would regard Christopher Steele not as a witness, but as a suspect in a larger crime. Let's keep in mind, he was a foreign national who attempted to spread disinformation to interfere in a presidential campaign. Now, we're taking the Russians to task for that. Uncle Bob the Executioner indicted a bunch of Russian trolls in 3 companies for allegedly interfering in the American election. Well, Steele's by far guilty of much, much more. And if you want to take it that far, you could also find that Steele was complicit in a larger conspiracy to take down the president. He admitted as such in his deposition. He said that he was hired by the law firm Perkins Coie, hired to put together information that could be used to challenge the results of the election if the rotten Reverend Clinton lost, to challenge the election in a legal matter. And remember, he had a deadline. That's what he told Coverup. He had a deadline. So if I'm Mr. Durham, I go ahead and I continue with my investigation. And at some point, when I get towards the end of that investigation, now viewing Christopher Steele as a potential co-conspirator in the plot, as well as the fact that he attempted to meddle, and did in fact meddle in the American elections in 2016. When I get toward the end of my investigation, I simply send his attorneys a letter. And I said, well, I was hoping to interview your client as a witness. We weren't going to prosecute him or bring any charges on him. We really want to resolve the issue that happened here within our own domestic spy agencies, our FBI, our DOJ, and various things like that. We weren't going to, try to view your client as a suspect or charges on him. We really just wanted to get information from him to help us with our case that we're working on here in the U.S. And we simply viewed him as a witness. And we'd like to give you one last opportunity for him to cooperate with us as a witness. That would be fine. On the other hand, if he chooses not to cooperate with us as a witness, then we've been looking at the possibility that he was part of a potential larger conspiracy that we're in the process of wrapping up right now, our investigation, and he would be caught up in that criminal conspiracy. Also, he was very active in meddling in the American election in 2016, and of course that's a crime for a foreign national to be meddling in our election. And so we would seek to charge him and have him brought back here to the United States to stand trial as a suspect, as a charged suspect, if he doesn't want to cooperate with us as a witness. So you've got a week to get back to me and let me know what you want to do. So that's how I would handle that if I were Durham. He can either be a witness or a suspect as part of a larger conspiracy, or I can charge him individually for his meddling, his role in meddling in the 2016 American elections. And there's probably some other crimes in there as well, by the way, such as lying. So, that's my thoughts on that. Okay, well, the Department of Justice has reversed its position on Michael Flynn. They are no longer using Michael Flynn as a witness, and now, just days before the scheduled hearing, they are saying that Flynn is now a conspirator, a co-conspirator, because they did not like his answers in regards to their investigation of the FARA violations that are alleged to have been the alleged FARA violations by Bijan Rafikian. Both Flynn and Rafikian are accused of lobbying on behalf of Turkey. Now, we learned that the FBI called Michael Flynn Jr. directly, and we heard this before, most as a rumor, but now it's fact. We learn now for fact that the FBI did call Michael Flynn Jr. directly, even though he had legal representation. And he advised them, hey, I've got legal representation, call my lawyer. But instead, they called him again and again, and they continued to harass him and essentially threaten him. Sidney Powell, the attorney for Michael Flynn, said that the reversal is disturbing. The prosecutors are saying that Flynn and his supposedly was supposed to be cooperating with them. They're now saying that he has made made false statements in his FARA filing. Sidney Powell says he is still, as far as she's concerned, a witness. So the judge in this case, Judge Solomon, is now demanding a full explanation as to why prosecutors are reversing their decision rather than to view Flynn as a witness, but now considering him again a co-conspirator. So it looks like the Michael Flynn situation just continues to get more and more strange. Who God only knows where this thing's going to end up, or if it's ever going to end. Who knows? Well, yesterday, I read for you, pretty much word for word, the press release for Slick Willy, Bill Clinton's press secretary. I read for you pretty much word for word the press release, which he claimed that Slick Willy had only traveled on Epstein's jet 4 times, and that he always had staff and Secret Service with him, and that he had never been to any of the residences of Epstein. Well, it looks like that didn't last very long, because just a couple hours later, this reporter, Conchita Sarnoff, who is the reporter down in Miami, who's been following this story forever. I mean, going back 12, 13 years, she's been on this story. She's been in all the court hearings. She's filed many FOIA requests for documents. She's seen and has all the logs. She wrote the book called Trafficking, which is all about this whole thing. She has seen a lot of these court documents, and she was on Fox News, and she completely disputed the statement made by Slick Willy's press secretary. And you notice he had his press secretary do it and not himself. She says that Bill Clinton basically is not telling the truth. She's seen the documents, she's seen the logs, and she said on Fox News last night that absolutely, for a fact, Bill Clinton traveled on the Lolita Express at least 27 times. Some of the times he had people with him. Some of the times he was alone, meaning no Secret Service and no staff. And she says that nearly every time that he was on that plane, there were underage girls on the plane. They were on board. There's even one witness who was a victim of Epstein, who was at his orgy island, and this one witness in her testimony stated that Bill Clinton was present there that day when she was sexually assaulted or what have you on Orgy Island. So Clinton says he was never there. Well, guess what? There's a witness from the court trial that says she saw him there. Maybe that's in that little black book that they now have, along with that CD-ROM and all those documents. Also, another person who was on quite a few of these flights was Doug Band. Of course, he was Doug Band, of course, was the money man, the bag man for the Clinton Foundation. He's the guy who you had to go through to get to Bill or Hillary. If you wanted a favor from Hillary at the State Department, you had to pay Bill. And in order to get the arrangement done, you had to contact Doug Band. He was the bag man for the Clinton Foundation. Also, we have this. Jeffrey Epstein's pimp, this woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, attended Chelsea's wedding in 2010, just 9 years ago. Now, this woman had been with Epstein for over 20 years. She was considered his personal pimp. She groomed and recruited girls for Epstein and his friends. And she had a front row VIP invitation to Chelsea's wedding. Epstein's little black book, according to Maxwell, contains 21 different phone numbers for Slick Willy. And this woman who was on Fox News, this reporter, Sarnoff, she says that having done very in-depth reporting, having interviewed many, many people, she attempted to interview Clinton. He would never talk to her, but she interviewed many, many other people, and she says that the association between Clinton and Epstein was much, much closer than he's letting on. And it's also being reported that this woman, who's, I guess, kind of had a falling out with Epstein after being his pimp for 20 years, this Ghislaine Maxwell, apparently she, it's being rumored that she may be cooperating with the FBI. So she would know all about Clinton and a lot of other people. You know, 2 days ago when they broke this story and the media came out and all they would talk about, the left-wing media, all they would try to talk about that day was to tie Trump to Epstein. Of course, that had no legs at all. Because really, they were just acquaintances. They had met. And Trump may have flown on his plane or something, but there's no one really suggesting that Trump was involved with any of this kind of stuff that Clinton and all his buddies are involved in. And we know that because we know Donald Trump's history. Donald Trump likes mature women, preferably supermodels, preferably of Eastern European descent. Trump doesn't have a history of liking little girls. So, but Bill Clinton, we know he likes them young. How young, we don't know, but I think we might find out. And we know all about Epstein. He likes them really young. So, what struck me that day is that they had all these left-wing media outlets coming out and trying to link Trump to Epstein. And I noticed throughout the day that normally when that would happen, you would have all the Hollywood left-wing nutcases. You would have the Rotten Reverend Clinton getting on Twitter. You would have all these left-wingers getting on Twitter, all these politicians getting on Twitter, using that fodder to advance their Twitter agenda against Trump. But I noticed that day that that did not happen. There was no Alec Baldwin on there because he's on the list, right along with Kevin Spacey and a bunch of others. The Rotten Reverend Clinton didn't have anything to tweet about. All them left-wing whack jobs out in Hollywood, perverts out there, I didn't see any of them jumping on the bandwagon. They had the perfect opportunity. The left-wing media was setting them up. They could have all jumped in. The water was warm. Very, very few, if any, did. Why? Because they know it was bullshit. They know that Trump really isn't connected to anything that Epstein's involved in, but they know a lot of them are, and a lot of their friends. And the Rotten Reverend Clinton, she knows all. In fact, You know, the rumors were not just that Slick Willy had traveled on the Lolita Express and had been to the island, but there was rumors a couple years ago, back during the campaign, actually, I think 2016 campaign, that the Right Reverend Clinton herself had been on the Lolita Express and had traveled to the island. And we know that she's pretty much of a lesbian. Maybe she and Bill shared some young girls. Who knows? These are sick people. And, you know, it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing this roundup now because, you know, I don't know how many of you have noticed, but this roundup of pedophiles since Trump has been president has been unprecedented. There have been over 3,000 pedophiles locked up since Trump has been president. There's been at least 2 national investigations spanning all 50 states. And in those 2 investigations, over 3,000 people, pedophiles, have been locked up. So clearly, Trump has given the word, once he became president, to the Department of Justice to go after these pedophiles. So clearly, Trump is not a pedophile. He wouldn't launch investigations on all these high-profile pedophiles. In fact, he was one of them. And in fact, if he was running around with this group, and we know he's not running around with this group because they all hate him. And we know that Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago for apparently trying to recruit or hit on one of his members' kids. And we know he did an interview where he said that he thought that Clinton was going to be in big trouble with his relationship with Epstein. There was a prosecutor down in Florida who said that when he was investigating this case, the only one that really, of the high-level people that apparently had been associated with Epstein that he contacted who was willing to talk to him or give him any information at all was Trump. Trump's clean as a whistle in this deal. But Slick Willy and a lot of other people are very, very nervous, and they should be. They should be, because Barr has not recused himself. Some reports that he recused. No, he's recused from things that happened in a previous suit from 13 years ago, but not the current situation. He's not recused. I'm sure he'll be watching very, very carefully to make sure that this worm doesn't get off the hook this time. This dude needs to be locked up for a long time, and all his friends along with him, including Slick Willy, because he lied his ass off. But why should that surprise us? I told you yesterday when I said, here's this press release from Bill Clinton's press secretary, his press spokesman, and I told you then it was a lie. But I probably didn't need to tell you that. You guys are too smart. Uh-oh. Judge Frederic has ruled in favor of Concord Management, saying that Mueller, Uncle Bob, the executioner, and the DOJ never proved that IRA, this Russian troll farm, had any link to the Russian government. However, Uncle Bob, the executioner, tries to make the connection, I guess you would say, in the Mueller report, but he fails to do so, according to the judge. And so because he released that information in the Mueller report, trying to tie the Russian trolls to the Russian government without the evidence to prove it, he has committed a severe violation against Concord Management. So Judge Frederic has issued a significant rebuke of the claim made by Mueller, and he will be proceeding now to consider an appropriate response to the violation by Uncle Bob the executioner, beginning with the possibility of contempt. In other words, those 13 trolls, half of the indictments against Russians has just been proven to be bullshit because he really didn't prove it. Just like he really doesn't prove anything in the Mueller report. It's all accusations. First of all, if you remember, this has been going on for a very long time. We've been talking about this with Concord Management for a long time. They never thought, Uncle Bob only indicted these Russians because he never believed that any of them would ever show up in court. But when he hit these 13 trolls, supposedly from the Russian troll farm, supposedly connected to Concord, which is connected to this IRA company, which is supposedly connected to Russia, the government, Putin. When he filed this case in court, Concord management actually hired a legal team, and they've been fighting it ever since and winning in a lot of cases. They've been winning a lot of these. It's one case, but they've been winning in a lot of the arguments going back and forth. It's been going on for now a year and a half. So finally, the Mueller report comes out, and Uncle Bob, the executioner, puts in his report, he ties this group of the Russian trolls linked to Concord management to Russia as interfering in the election. But he shows no evidence to prove it. And Concord, of course, has produced all their evidence as best as you can to show that you didn't commit a crime. But Mueller and his folks have never been able to prove the evidence in court that this is true. Yet they went ahead and put it in the report anyway, making the accusation. And so, of course, Concord's lawyers responded to that. The judge has now reviewed it, and he has said, flat out, no, Uncle Bob, you didn't make the case. You haven't proven anything. And by putting that in the report, you've obviously violated these people, Concord management. And so now there's going to have to be something done about it. So the judge is going to be looking at this, and it's here pretty soon, I assume in the not too distant future. He'll be ruling on what to do. It'll probably start with contempt by Uncle Bob the executioner and the Hillary donor posse. He'll hold them in contempt. Whether he'll levy fines or jail time or whatever, we don't know. But at this point, there goes half of the Russian collusion delusion down in flames from the Mueller report. There it goes. Half of it done. As the Russian collusion delusion is in the process of being disproven. Here's half of them. Now we'll wait and see what Barr and Durham come up with to finish off the job. And when they get done, it'll be proven there was no Russian interference at all. And keeping on a similar vein, as you know, today is the anniversary of the murder, I should say, of Seth Rich. And of course, the day before, yesterday, the entire media was blanketed, I mean blanketed, with a story that everyone else, for some strange reason, decided to copy. Everybody, from The Hill to Politico to the Washington Times, you name it, everybody copied this story. By Michael Isikoff. That's right, the mouthpiece for the CIA and Yahoo News. You had the guy who first broke the first couple collusion delusion stories, which the Rotten Reverend Clinton and her campaign capitalized on. He was receiving information directly from the corrupt Ukrainians. He was literally working for the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign, feeding them information. He was working directly for the CIA, obviously, and has been for a long time. This guy is up to his eyeballs in corruption. He is literally a prostitute for the CIA. That's what Michael Isikoff is. So what does he do? He writes an article yesterday, meant for us all to read today, on the anniversary of Seth Rich's murder, basically calling the entire story about Seth Rich being murdered by some goons associated with Hillary Clinton, calling the entire thing a conspiracy, and in fact blaming it on the Russians. So here's Isikoff. He spends 2.5 years on the Russian collusion delusion, being one of the founders of the theory. Then he comes out about 3 or 4 months and goes, well, it looks like that Russian collusion delusion theory I had in the story, it looks like there may not be much to it. So now he writes a story, and he goes after Hannity and after everybody who covered the Seth Rich murder. And he even says that, well, Julian Assange, he only when he came out and had that interview with that Dutch news reporter, he was covering for himself and the Russians. Yeah, he was covering for himself and the Russians, but it was actually the Russians who started this whole conspiracy theory that Seth Rich was murdered because he leaked the stuff to WikiLeaks. That was all a big conspiracy theory, as if it's all a fact, that it's been proven to be a conspiracy theory. It was actually the Russians who were involved in that, and that Seth Rich was probably murdered by a couple of thugs. And then they go talk to the prosecutor, like anyone would take her word for anything. Her name is Deborah Sines. She was the U.S. attorney assigned to the case. Wonderful job she did. She couldn't find the guys who did it. She's a deep state operator. I absolutely guarantee that. Absolutely guarantee that. I would love to have a conversation with her. She's a lousy investigator. I can tell you that right now. She was a cover-up artist. But she goes one step farther and tells Isikoff to contribute to his bullshit conspiracy theory news piece. She says that she saw classified documents that proved that the Russian SVR were pushing the theory that Rich was murdered by somebody close to DNC or the Clintons because he leaked the stuff to WikiLeaks. And she says it was all just a big conspiracy theory pushed by the Russians. Yeah. Well, again, just disregard this. What surprised me is the fact that they were able to get this. It wasn't just like Isikoff wrote this in Yahoo News and just was a Yahoo News story. Everybody copied and pasted that story. Everybody copied and pasted that story. And Zero Hedge is probably the only one who actually called bullshit on it. I mean, literally The Hill copied and pasted it. The Washington Examiner copied and pasted it. What's with you, Byron York? Now, he wasn't the guy that wrote it, but the site he writes for certainly did. They did a copy and paste job of a complete bullshit theory. Now, as most of you know, I did, about 3 months after the Seth Rich murder, I did a 2-part video, long before I even started doing TowerGate videos. And I went through, a ton of stuff, 2 long videos. I think both of them were close to an hour long. And I went through it the way that, say, an investigator would approach, a case like that, an unsolved murder like that. And I would love to sit down with this prosecutor, because there's no way that you can go through the case the way I did and even think for a minute that Russians had anything to do with it. And the fact that she couldn't solve the crime tells us she wasn't trying to solve the crime, because it could have been solved. Never interviewed Assange. Never interviewed anyone at the DNC. Never interviewed Donna Brazil, Debbie Blabbermouth Wasserman Schultz. None of them. Didn't even look at that angle. Didn't even look at that angle at all. It was a cover-up, and it's still a cover-up. And by the way, the fact that the Russians somehow created this narrative is ridiculous. There must have been 50 different people that I'm aware of, including myself, that were all covering the Seth Rich murder, who did videos about it, who did research on it, and who had varying different types of opinions on who did what and that type of thing. I mean, George Webb was all over it. I was all over it. Son of Nuo was all over it. There were quite a few people. Zero Hedge. I mean, a lot of people were covering the Seth Rich, and we all had slightly different versions of what we thought happened. None of us were buying into this. I don't know anyone that bought into the idea that... I never said anywhere in my video that specifically Hillary Clinton had her goons kill Rich. I didn't say that, nor did practically anybody else. So this is all, again, just Michael Isikoff back at his old job, working for the CIA, trying to do a CYA piece on the day of the murder of Seth Rich. And then he ends the piece by saying how much we're doing a disservice to the Rich family and all this kind of stuff. That's what they fall back on all the time. Total bullshit. Total bullshit. We still don't have the truth about Seth Rich. Finally, yesterday, Felix Sater was at the House Intelligence Committee being questioned again. And during that interview, he said that Glenn Simpson lied. He told the committee that Glenn Simpson lied 2 times from the transcript he's seen. Once he said Glenn Simpson lied specifically about him, and he said the other thing that he lied about is he didn't tell everyone that he was working for the Russians, that he was working for Veselnitskaya. Glenn Simpson, at the same time he was working for the Rotten Reverend Clinton, providing the background narrative for the dossier information, at the same exact time he was working for the Russians on behalf of Veselnitskaya on the Prevazon case. And he lied about that, according to Felix Sater. And he said that Simpson is the closest thing you're going to get to Russia. In other words, the Russia collusion delusion. You're looking for the Russia collusion delusion. Look at Glenn Simpson and his peeps. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See you guys. Bye.